who we were anticipating to join?
From the county, it looks like everyone that's going to be here from the county, from La Plata County, is present.
Kim is on. Is Ron on? Are we able to see all
Indiana.
people? Sarah, are you able to see if Ron Margolis has joined?
Just logged
I
in.
just let him in. He's here.
And how about Danah Barlow
I'm here.
and Andrea
Danah.
Mercier?
Mhm.
Is Andrea here?
Yes,
She
she
is.
is.
Oh, yay.
Anna, are you able to turn your video on? Or are you going to leave it off?
I don't know. You know how much I love doing this.
Well,
So
If you could just turn it on for your talk, you want to just try it?
maybe turn it off for my talk would be the better route. You
Sure.
can see me now, all right?
Hi, Danah. Hi.
Here I am. Hi, Deborah.
Okay, well, with that, I think perhaps we can begin. Nancy, did you want to do opening remarks?
Okay. I'm Dr. Nancy Vandover, 35-year resident of La Plata County. I have BAs in biology and botany, doctorates in veterinary medicine, human oriental medicine, and I'm a licensed acupuncturist. Now an advocate for public and environmental health and EMS disabled rights. We want to thank the county for giving us the opportunity to talk about something that deeply concerns us, wireless radiation. Although it is odorless and invisible, it is still a hazardous environmental pollutant that has many biological effects. I think it is one of the worst toxins in the world now because it is so ubiquitous and most people are oblivious to its harm. The last 50 years of my life, studying and working in biological sciences and then medicine, has taught me that environmental health promotes public health. The opposite is also true, but sick bodies and ecosystems often can heal if toxins are removed. You will hear about the consequences we face if we don't reduce electropollution, and you will also hear about safer options for using our technology. There have been decades of legitimate research showing clear evidence of biological harm, even cancer, yet it is mostly being ignored when it comes to safety guidelines. Industry profits have been deemed more important, as we have seen with other pollutants in the past, like DDT, asbestos, tobacco, and lead. Scientists and doctors, millions of regular citizens around the globe are asking for the precautionary principle to be applied to microwave radiation, especially with the arrival of 5G, the 5th generation, which could leave no place free of this toxin. The precautionary principle implies that there is a social responsibility to protect the public from exposure to harm when scientific investigation has found a plausible risk. In some legal systems, as in the law of the European Union, the application of the precautionary principle has been made a statutory requirement. Please open your minds and hearts to the information these dedicated people share with you today, and take every action you can to protect the public and environmental health of La Plata County. I am so very happy to present Cece Doucette, technology safety educator who introduced legislation and helped her schools become the first in the nation to safeguard students and staff. She is the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology and works with schools, communities, municipalities, and legislatures to address wireless radiation and public health. Cece?
Thank you so much, Nancy, for that lovely introduction and for all the hard work that you and the others in Colorado have done to bring us to this point today where you can have an open dialogue and share the facts about today's wireless technology. What I would like to do is do screen sharing, and I will do it in presentation mode. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. So again, thank you for joining us today for Wireless Technology Risks and Safer Municipal Solutions in La Plata County, Colorado. And that MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And I'm here on the East Coast, just outside of Boston. And I had no idea there was anything to look at with wireless technology until book group one night when an electrical engineer friend of mine tipped me off that there could be something up biologically with wireless. So that's where my journey began. And after our schools began to investigate, we became the first in the nation to start taking precautionary measures. And then I went and I worked with my Senator Karen Spilka, who's now the Senate president here in Massachusetts. And when I presented her with the facts, she put me with a lawyer in her office and we crafted a bill to start looking at this. And then most recently, I was brought up to New Hampshire to testify on a law or on a bill that became law. And we'll look at that in a little bit more depth. And on this journey, I've had the privilege of connecting with many of the world's leading doctors and scientists and public health experts. And we have built a nonprofit out of Europe called Wireless Education, where we've distilled this vast amount of science and risk and medical best practices into half-an-hour courses that anybody can take to understand what this is, and then to learn what steps to start taking towards safe technology. And as Nancy mentioned, I have helped to co-found Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And there are groups like this coming up all over the United States and internationally, because more and more people are becoming ill from this and starting to band together to work toward change in our communities. I was very honored to be asked to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference down at the National Institutes of Health. And anywhere on my presentation where you see these underlines, you can drill right down to the facts behind them. And I will send this to La Plata at the end of the day today and make sure that you have this presentation. And Nancy, I'll send it to you as well, and you can distribute it out to the others who have participated today. But the reason why I included this one is for those of us who are visual learners and we like to learn through video, these videos at the National Institutes of Health are less than 10 minutes each. I was so honored to have with us the retired president of Microsoft Canada, Frank Clegg, who when he retired went and sought out a dozen of the world's leading experts on this radio frequency microwave radiation that is now wireless today. And he is working up in Canada on safe technology. And he had a lot to say about why we have not done right by the public. And we also brought Dr. Martin Paul, who's one of the world's leading experts on this, to talk about the science, and Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of a nonprofit called the Environmental Health Trust, which has the world's greatest database on this and just a wealth of resources for all of us to share. So those links are important. And when I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue back in, I want to say 2012, 2013, we had a huge gap in that there were so many people getting sick and being misdiagnosed. And we had no way to get our medical teams up to speed on this. And we just came off of the 2021 EMF Medical Conference. EMF stands for the electromagnetic fields of this radio frequency microwave radiation that is pulsed out from everything wireless. And so we brought together world leading scientists, doctors, public health experts, and people who have become injured from this microwave exposure. So we're so excited. The conference, although we had to move it to a virtual platform because of the pandemic, it allowed us to train many more doctors and nurses and first responders and members of the public virtually. And now those videos are being prepared for continuing medical education credits and for continuing education credits for nurses. And those will be available at this link very soon. So that's a bit about me. What I'd like to do is share with you what we'll go over today. We'll talk about the legal fine print. We'll talk about the science. We'll walk through the conflicts of interest that exist at almost all levels. And we'll talk about where are these radiation emissions coming from in our municipalities. And then let's talk about solutions, because there are so many that we can implement today to have much safer technology. And then we'll take it down another level and say, what might La Plata County do as their next steps? So this little sign here, the best practices for mobile devices, is what my schools came up with. They were looking for higher authorities to tell them what to do, but our state level Board of Education didn't understand this. At the town level, they didn't understand this. And then at the legislative level, they didn't understand this. So there was a great opportunity to educate. But I think what happened in my town is when they read the legal fine print, they sort of had an uh-oh moment. So for anybody who's with us today, if you own an iPhone, I would invite you to grab your iPhone right now, and we will walk you through what comes with all of our devices. But I know where it is in the iPhone, so I can teach you this really quickly. So for other devices like the iPads and others, there's a terrific website called See the Fine Print, where you can go out and look and see, like, who would know that the iPad used to have a disclaimer in it that said this can cause seizures and blackouts and eye strain. And we know of children who have had their first seizures while sitting there on the iPad. So if you have an iPhone, go into settings. From settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. Now, if it's an older phone, up at the top you hit about, but most people have upgraded since then. So from general or from about, scroll all the way down to the bottom. And I think second from last, you'll see something like legal and regulatory. And if you're wanting to share this with loved ones or colleagues later, you can just remember the acronym GAL. Like Dr. Vandover brought in this GAL to talk to us about technology safety. So that's a pretty easy way to remember where to get back to it. Once you're in legal and regulatory, scroll down, or you don't even have to scroll down, but look down 5 or 6 and you'll see RF exposure. When you hit RF exposure, we're now in that legal fine print, and it tells us a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So basically, don't keep a wireless device on your body, or you may exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. What they don't tell us is that those public radiation exposure limits that the FCC has been using for decades were never safety tested for biological harm. And in the next paragraph, it tells us to use a hands-free option, right? So don't touch this thing while it's transmitting, or you're going to exceed those FCC limits. So this isn't just for cell phones, though. This is for every single device out there that is transmitting using wireless radio frequency radiation antennas. So all the smart technology, the smart cities, the smart superhighways, as we see when we look at the science, are very toxic. And everything, you know, you need to understand what's coming into your home or your office or your schools, because the industry wants everything to have an antenna in it, so we can have the Internet of Things, whereby they will harvest your data and be able to take that data and sell it off to third parties who then want to come and sell you their products. So one of the other things that we did here in Ashland that became a first in the nation is when I learned about this, and then I learned that there are ways that we can measure and understand what this invisible toxin is, my brain went to, let's get some meters, put them in our community so we can all borrow them and measure what this radiation looks like. So this right here is a radio frequency radiation detection meter. This one's called an acoustimeter, which allows us to see and hear these toxins. And then for those who like to jump into the numbers, it will tell you numerically how many volts per meter that is being exposed to you and your loved ones. So this is my meter here. And in my home, I've done everything I could to keep the radiation out. But watch what happens when I turn on my cell phone. So I have a cell phone just for emergency purposes. Most people know to catch me either on my landline, which is a safe connection, or through email. So I'm turning off airplane mode, and I have put my cell phone in active mode. And this is what our bodies are exposed to day in and day out. And our cells feel this, but for you and I, it's invisible unless we measure it. So think about a child in a classroom, or 20 or 30 children in a classroom, and every single one of them is working on one of these wireless devices. So I just put mine back down into airplane mode. So we were very grateful. It took me 3 tries, but eventually after I educated individually each one of our select board members and then went to a library trustees meeting and taught them about this, we became the first in the United States to put one of these on loan in our public library, and others across the country are now doing the same. So what does the science tell us? This study over here is done by the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And it's the largest study they've ever conducted on anything. It was $30 million over the course of 2 decades. And they went in 2 decades ago expecting to prove that cell phones are safe. But once they had the data, they held an unprecedented 3-day peer review down at the National Institutes of Health. And world-leading scientists whose life's work is devoted to studying radio frequency gathered for 3 days and testified. And at the end, the National Toxicology Program put out their final report, and they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors, along with DNA damage and a host of other harms. So clear evidence is the highest category out of 5 categories they can give: clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. And every time one of these good studies comes out, the industry jumps in and starts spinning it like, oh, that's just one study, you don't need to pay attention to that. Well, right on the heels of the major US study, Italy's Ramazzini Institute completed another large-scale study that corroborated everything that we found here in the United States. So through this link, you can go read those studies. And as I mentioned, DNA damage, which is the roadmap to grow a proper human, we are breaking the DNA with this microwave radiation. And then the infertility studies are actually the set that got me on my feet, because these other studies weren't out yet when I started examining this. But when I looked at the fertility studies, I saw that they've taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas turned on, and it changed the DNA, it slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And that was the day I found my voice, because our youngest had just gone into high school. Our oldest was up in college. Both of them had a laptop, and of course, where are they using it? But right on top of their reproductive organs. So that's when I started this conversation with my town. So there are other studies on infertility, impact on women, on miscarriages, and more. And then neurotoxicity. Oh my goodness, we have never seen children hospitalized for neurological illnesses like we are seeing today. Even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression. And you go talk to your school counselors and talk about how much suicidal ideation there is. That when I was a kid, you never heard about this level of anybody suffering these neurological ailments. So the science shows links to ADD, ADHD, to autism, to Alzheimer's coming on at earlier and earlier ages. And children, as Andrea will speak to a little later today, children are especially vulnerable. They're not just little adults. As this diagram by Dr. Om Gandhi shows us, if you look at the gentleman on the right, that the graphic above is tilted so as if you had the cell phone to your ear, and you can see how far that radiation penetrates into a fully formed adult head. Then you'd see a 10-year-old and it's going about 2/3 of the way across that child's brain. And look what happens to a 5-year-old. And we are immersing our children in this day and night. Their skulls are not fully formed. They're thinner, so they're absorbing more radiation through their skulls, and their brains have a higher water content. And so they are much more heavily impacted, and their central nervous system is still under development. Their immune system is still under development, and we are damaging their DNA. So those are the long-term effects. In the short term, many people are experiencing symptoms of microwave sickness or electromagnetic sensitivity, but their doctors, by and large, have not been trained to recognize it. So you go with your sick child or with your sick self to the doctors, they run all the tests they know to run, and they come up empty. Here's what the science is showing us and what society is going through right now. So Ms. Symington and Shisler will also speak to this later on as well. But insomnia is a huge one. So many people don't sleep right today. And the science, you know, again, for a long time, the industry would spin it like, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature. Keep doing what you're doing. But now we have the science and we better understand the mechanisms of harm. One of them with insomnia is in the wee hours of darkness. The pineal gland in the brain is meant to release the melatonin. Melatonin goes in and helps to regulate our sleep cycle as part of the circadian rhythm. It also helps to escort the toxins from the day out of our body through the bloodstream. Well, now we've got this invisible light energy form pulsing all night long, and the brain thinks the lights are on. So it's not properly releasing the melatonin. Good news is, with a little tiny bit of education, a lot of people say, wow, it's invisible. I can't see it. Why should I believe this? But I haven't slept in ages. So they'll try it. They'll shut everything off at night. Time and again, they come back and say, I actually slept through the night. My head hit the pillow. I didn't wake up till the next day, when our poor bodies just get a break. So insomnia is a huge one. Stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds and ear bleeds. When we hardwired our house, my daughter's headaches and nosebleeds went way down, unless she allows herself to get dehydrated. But what high school kid should be having an optical migraine? That's what was happening to my daughter. Chronic fatigue. People who are just knuckle dragging all the time start to recover when they have a safe, toxin-free environment. Pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities, heating, flushing, rashes, tingling, irregular heartbeats, too fast or too slow. Remember, we are biologically electrical beings. Our brain is an electrical organ, our heart, our lungs, and we are so fine-tuned. We have whispering signals all day and night that this radiation is disrupting.
Yeah.
Cognitive impairment for the elderly and the children. And then these anger and behavior issues. I was honestly a bit terrified when I was at this medical conference, and more than one of the physicians said, we can anticipate more of these societal mass shootings. We are destroying the brains of so many people today. And they were saying that as you degrade the brain, the behavior regulation starts to get hit really hard. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. And it's not just us, it's every biological cell on the planet. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there are excellent resources if you go into this link to talk about what's happening to our pollinators, what's happening to our birds and our bees. It's not just the neonicotinoids. When you look at the science on the bee studies, this disrupts their navigational system. They have magnetite that is supposed to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. And now we've got this ginormous layer of electrosmog. And so we are really screwing up the flora and the fauna as well. But beyond that, You don't even want to know what goes into getting our cell phones and all of our electronics and the human atrocities that are going to get all the mineral extractions that go into our phones that the industry keeps saying, oh, get rid of that one, we'll get a new one, we've got newer and better, without any information about what is happening with humanitarian rights in the background. And then, as Dr. Schoechle will tell us, wireless technology and all that infrastructure consumes 10 times more energy than the safe, secure solution, which is bringing fiber to the premises. And then every time we use our phones, you know, the industry keeps pushing everything. Here, get this app, get that app. We might use it once or twice as a novelty, and it's still sitting there on our devices, constantly doing updates in the background, using energy, exposing us to more radiation, unless we simply learn to take charge of our technology and control all of that. So where are these points of emissions in our communities? I want to give a great big shout out to La Plata County, because from what I understand, folks in your community have already fought hard to give you an opt-out. That means that if you don't want to have a utility meter for gas, water, electric, or solar that gets put on your house without informed consent and constantly pulses this microwave radiation at hundreds or thousands of cycles per day, pulsing back and forth, then you have the right to choose to have an analog meter that doesn't radiate you and your loved ones. So for those of you who worked so hard on that in La Plata County, hats off to you, and hats off to your municipality for listening, because some don't. And as I said, it pulses the radiation continuously, but one of the other risks is that this radio frequency can hop on the house wiring and the pipes and turn your whole house into a radiating antenna, which is a really bad idea. And then if you look at this brochure, which you can get out through the utility smart meter link, they just put these on our homes with no information on safety. And if you've got a child or a pregnant woman or an elderly person or somebody with a compromised health situation, you are just, you know, what we're doing to people unwittingly is just unconscionable. So, and then oftentimes they get these these people in society who can't seem to do much else. They round them up, they hire them to go get all this stuff put into your neighborhood. They'll incentivize them. If you get 100% of the neighborhood, they'll give you a bonus. And they're not even qualified electricians to be putting this in. So we see fires and explosions and improper grounding, and that too can become a nightmare. And then again, the whole privacy and data issue, where they're just harvesting your data, pulsing this information back and forth day and night, and selling that off to people who want to sell you product. So what often happens is if you have a multi-family unit dwelling, like an apartment complex or a condo building, or you know, a senior residency, the industry will come in and put a whole bank of these smart meters right outside somebody's living space, and they get walloped with huge amounts of microwave radiation. They get so sick, they go to their doctors. The doctors can't figure out what's going on. They spend thousands of dollars out of pocket going to specialist after specialist. And then if you're lucky, somebody says your symptoms line up with electromagnetic sensitivity or microwave sickness. And those are the lucky ones who figure it out. The others are still sitting out there sick as a dog and don't know why. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer, and his wife is a medical doctor. This happened to them. There was a bank of smart meters that showed up on their condo, and they were some of the ones that got so sick. But Jeremy is just this lovely soul who did a TED Talk, and in 15 minutes, you can go listen to Jeremy's story as well. And he's now dedicated his life too to helping others to get to safe technology. So the next point of emission in our communities is the cell towers. And I really implore you to look at the non-industry funded science. And if you go to this link, you can start looking at it. So I'm a technical and professional writer by trade, and I got in way over my head with this. And then I couldn't remember where I saw credible sources that I wanted to later share. So being a tech writer, I just set myself up with a research repository that I call Understanding EMFs, or electromagnetic fields. And as I find scientific references, I just put them there. I just want to make it easy for others to get out there and get credible information. And then I found a site called antennasearch.com. So I went out and I put in your state house address in Colorado, just to see what's going on around, your densified areas. So when I put in your state house address, it shows that there are 873 large cell antennas for 3G and 4G within a 3-mile radius of your state house. 873 cell towers or cell antennas on towers, on buildings, on poles, pulsing this radiation constantly. And then I went in and I put in your La Plata address for your, town hall. And you can see this graphic here is all these cell towers and antennas right where you guys go to work every day. So this is very serious that we should all take a personal interest in. So then those are the big cell towers. Now, what are these small cell antennas that we keep hearing about for 5G? So here's a graphic of what they might look like. So 5G simply means 5th generation technology. And one would think, okay, that's just the next phase after 3rd and 4th, or 3G and 4G. But 5G is very, very different. So right now, they're promising us that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads. We're going to have smart cities. But go do a little bit of research and see who's buying up the entertainment companies. It's the wireless industry. This is another revenue stream for them, entertainment. And 5G does not replace all the electrosmog that they've already put in. 3G and 4G antennas, mostly 4G, will be the backbone for these 5G small cell antennas. Because what they've done is there's something called the electromagnetic spectrum, which shows us how the waves travel and how frequently they travel. Well, they've used up most of the spectrum that we're using with these bigger waves that carry your cell signal now. All that's left are these crummy little millimeter waves. That's all that's left to monetize here. So what they're saying is, oh, these millimeter waves are going to give you such faster speeds, but they can't go through objects like these bigger waves that are the backbone do. So in order for 5G to fly, the industry is proposing, and they've already started, to put a cell tower every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods in our public access way to make 5G fly. So they're going to put a cell tower outside your house or on your house. So another atrocity is that because they can't go through objects, sometimes these things come in overnight and they come in and they just start decimating the trees. I've seen pictures up in Vermont or Maine where they just come in and literally lop off the trees wherever these antennas are, so the signal will go through. Well, what happens when that tree grows back, right? It's crummy technology. So again, here's their goal, every 2 to 12 houses. And this graphic here I found out on the internet is what's already happening in Denver. And they're doing this in all of the big cities. They're putting this in our stadiums. I know here, the Boston Red Sox, they've got it down at Fenway Park. They've got it out at Gillette Stadium where the New England Patriots play. And I have a hunch that there's some mile-high things going on in Colorado too. So all these little symbols and dots, colors are all the many different telecom companies that are putting these in, and all these different shapes. They're putting them on poles. They're putting them on light poles. They're putting them on wires. There's 6 different things. You can go look at this Denver for, I think it's a 96-page document that specs out what these things look like and where they're putting them and how sleekly they're putting them in. So an entire pole could just be full of these antennas from different carriers. So we really need to come up to speed on this and quickly. So every time they've rolled out a new generation, they say, oh, everybody's going to get much faster, much better technology. Well, you guys know because you have a lot of rural areas. They've never delivered on those earlier promises. So what they're saying with 5G is that, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to launch all these satellites up in the sky. They've already licensed them. Elon Musk and his buddies are already launching these things up there. We're going to put thousands, hundreds of thousands of satellites up in the sky that will connect with devices down here on the ground. So literally, if we don't get a hold of this, there is going to be nowhere you and I can go without being microwaved. And then the kicker is Congressman or Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut at a congressional commerce hearing at the federal level said to the industry, so please share with us, how much money have you invested to make sure this is safe before it was brought to market? And there were two industry leaders sitting there kind of hemming and hawing, basically saying, well, actually, Senator, we don't know of any science that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so basically we're flying blind here. And that's the industry's MO. And then worse, we're now getting reports that 5G is a bad joke. The industry's not even delivering better speeds. Even with the 4G we have, we're getting better speeds. So this 5G is great for the industry. It's lousy for us and it's lousy for our communities. So our schools, we really, I hope you guys will really do something with this very, very soon. As I mentioned, and I showed you that sign earlier, you know, we have become the first in the nation to even have this sign to start taking precautions, and they're still waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. Then we brought in a world-leading panel of experts in Massachusetts to do a forum called Questioning the Safety of Our Children's Exposure to Wireless Radiation in Schools. And there we had Frank Clegg was so gracious to join us by teleconference from Microsoft Canada. We had Dr. Ronald Melnick, who is the senior toxicologist who designed our government's $30 million study that showed clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage. We had Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she sees huge correlations with the families in her care and what we know happens with microwave radiation exposures. And we also had with us Theodora Scarrato from the Environmental Health Trust, and we had Dr. David Carpenter, who's been a member of the World Health Organization, and he's a medical doctor, teaching us what these toxic exposures are and why we can no longer assume that any wireless radiation in our communities is safe. So that is an excellent one for your schools to really come up to speed on. And then, so get this, the New York Times did a series. Their editors don't actually let them properly report on microwave sickness, but somehow they did kind of circle around it, and they did a series of articles on what Silicon Valley executives are doing with their children. They're sending their children to schools with no technology, not hardwired technology, not wireless, but no technology, because they know a child's brain develops best with real-time interaction with loving adults, their peers, and the natural environment. And they go so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And yet they keep forcing this into our schools. Maryland, through the work of folks in that state and Theodore Scarrato at the Environmental Health Trust, Maryland became the first public health agency to recommend hardwiring our schools. And then there's already a set of low EMF best practices for our schools to use through the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools, which is a group that rates schools for how green they are and how safe they are. So we have so much already to offer once we know to look. Well, I kept saying, if the science is bad as what I'm reading, why don't we know about this? And surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics published this 59-page report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And when you go and look to see who our FCC commissioners are, they've all come out of industry. So that was my missing piece. I'm like, oh, so nobody at the federal level's got our backs on this. So we better get busy at the local level and start fixing this. So when the FCC, or when the National Toxicology Program study came out, the $30 million one that concluded clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage, that was actually commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration a couple of decades ago. Their job is to take that science and parlay it into public policy. But today, the gentleman who's in charge of radiation went over to the FCC and said, yeah, that report's not important. Keep doing what you're doing. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Jeffrey Shuren to do that? Well, when you dig a little bit into it, you see that his wife is a partner in a law firm that represents the industry to the tune of billions of dollars. So he has a clear conflict of interest. He should have been nowhere near that study. So what we should be doing is following something called the precautionary principle. And in science, as Dr. Vandover shared with us, if there is science that's starting to show that there's something wrong here, it is our moral obligation to stop exposing the public to that toxin until the scientific review is complete. And in Europe, the European Parliament is already working behind the precautionary principle. Other countries have already brought their radiation exposure levels more in line with the science, but here in the US, all Wi-Fi all the time. So I was sitting at a neighboring school. We got a meeting with their health and wellness committee, and we had a dozen people around a conference room table. And as I was sharing this information, there was a gentleman on the committee who had his iPad, and as I'm educating, he's looking and he says, well, hey, but what about this? The New York Times says it's not a problem. It's just the Russians fear-mongering again. Right? That's a very good question. And that's a really good point to bring up, because the New York Times used to be a really integrity-based publication. But who would know that Verizon has a 5G lab at the New York Times? Who would know that they have industry on their board? Who would know that in Ireland, the ombudsman called out the New York Times and cited them with a violation of the Truth and Accuracy Code? So we can't believe the headlines that we see. We need to know where to look for scientific integrity. And, you know, my heart broke a little bit more the day I realized this corruption goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. If you go out there and start validating this, you will still see false information posted from several years ago, from before these great animal studies were completed. And who would know that in 2020, they actually reopened their investigation on radio frequency, because now we do have the animal studies, because what happens to these rodents happens to us. That's why we do the animal studies. And now when you go out to that 2020 EMF investigation, I tried it, I think last week, and it said, oh, this web page is under construction. So they've kind of taken it down. But there's something called the Wayback Machine. It's a website, and you can go back and find things that used to be on the internet before somebody pulled them down. So there are two groups at the World Health Organization. One is very, very industry dominated, and the other is science-based. And so we're just waiting to see what they're doing with that investigation, because in their call for scientists, they're talking about cancers, they're talking about infertility, they're talking about electromagnetic sensitivities. But are they going to handpick industry people for this again and drag us through this whole thing again? Or are they going to actually let real scientists with qualified credentials serve on this? So all that's the bad news, right? all that's the, oh my gosh. So I tell people, you know, you're going to be looking at your world a little differently today than you perhaps did an hour ago. And I say, that's okay. Go freak out. When my kids would freak out when they were little, I'd say, go scream into a pillow. You'll feel a lot better when you're done. So do whatever you need to do and then come back to the table. And then let's see, how do we get from where we are to safe technology? And it's not rocket science. We know how to do this. So, you know, I love that Martin Luther King Jr. taught us anytime we have meaningful societal change, it comes through 3 channels. 1, the public engages. 2, the courts eventually rule and hold the guilty accountable. And 3, public policy catches up. So let's take a quick peek as to what's going on now. So here in my state of Massachusetts, we've gotten all sorts of inroads where in the town of Shelburne, they have a 1,500-foot setback in their bylaws saying you can't put a wireless communication facility within 1,500 feet of somebody's home. You can't put it within 3,000 feet of a school, right? We could all take a lesson from Shelburne. And then Burlington, Massachusetts became a national example when they adopted their small cell policy. They hired an attorney who specializes in telecom law because most of our municipal attorneys do not understand the nuances of the telecom law. And when they ratified that small cell policy, the Verizon lawyer was there that night and said, well, in the policy, it states that you've got to come back every year and recertify that every one of these small cells is viable in the community. And the vendor would have to pay the town a fee to recertify every single one of those small cells. And the Verizon lawyer said, well, our town does, or our client does not wish to set a precedent because remember, the industry wants to put in millions of these and they certainly don't want to pay a recertification fee, nor do they want to take the time and come back and recertify every one of those poles or wires that they're going to put up. So with that, the Verizon lawyer withdrew their 7 small cell applications. So don't listen to the industry when they say, oh, your hands are tied, our hands are tied, you know, at the federal level, you basically have to roll over. That is so far from the truth, but that's all our towns have ever been taught. So please engage with a lawyer who really knows what they're doing. So a lot of towns in Massachusetts have been making some good headway, and I was delighted to be able to report in Colorado, the Lakewood Broadband Group, their code was amended to put in protections, and Mr. Margolis, who's going to speak today, will talk to you more about that. In Larimer County, they got a 250-foot residential setback in their telecom code. So you guys have some good examples to already get started with. And then fire stations. A lot of fire stations refuse to have these antennas mounted anywhere near their firehouses. Back in 2004, the International Association of Firefighters put out a position statement because firefighters were getting sick from these cell towers. They would get on their engines and go out to respond, like out in Santa Barbara, California, went to go respond to a crisis in the community, and they couldn't even remember where they were going, right? And so there have been brain scans done to show that it's changing the gray matter of the brain. And so firefighters who are in the know will refuse any cellular equipment on their fire stations. And you may want to speak with your own La Plata fire chief because he may know something about this. And then this map here shows that a lot of communities in Colorado are doing exactly what the industry does not want you to do. And that's to take charge as if it were a utility and manage it yourself and bring fiber to the premises. Don't just bring it down the center of the road and then throw up wireless nodes for the last 100 feet. Bring it all the way hardwired to the premises, and then you just pick up with Ethernet cables and adapters indoors. And so, yeah, this map over here you can get to through this link here with the Muni networks. And then future-proof it. Wireless is not future-proof. Hardwired to the premises is. So there are people all over the state who are banding together. Coloradans for Safe Technology. They've already got a website put up. Their goal is to get local control over all wireless facilities and get hardwired safe technology. And ALEC is one of these lobbyist groups who came into many states, like half the states in the United States, and made it sound like a really good thing. If you just remove local control, boy, we can get you the greatest technology ever. And so these unwitting states allowed industry to put this on the books that strips you of your local control. So know that you've got a lot of good residents working hard on this that will help you, and you as a county can lend your voice and support them to help get this fixed. And then what a lovely thing that was done from 2009 to 2011. When your citizens went and spoke to the governors, they actually proclaimed May as Electromagnetic Sensitivity Awareness Month with this beautiful proclamation over here that talks about what are electrical sensitivities and why does the public deserve to be protected. So that's something that you guys could look at reintroducing quickly. May's right around the corner, no time like the present, right? So good for Colorado for all this wonderful work. And it's not just happening in my town. It's not just happening in yours. A grandmother in Easton, Connecticut figured out what 5G was, worked with her town. They've banned it. Hawaii County passed a resolution on the Big Island of Hawaii to ban 5G. Bermuda has a temporary moratorium on 5G, and this is happening all over the world. You can go into this link and just one after another see all this stuff, but we don't hear about it in mainstream media, right? We used to have like 50 independent media stations that have all been bought out now, and go look to see who those parent companies are, and they own the telecom industry. So we get corporate media, we don't get public media anymore. Even PBS is no longer publicly funded. They've got a lot of corporate on their pages too. So looking at it from the legal lens, we are joining the conversation at an excellent point in time. The FCC is being sued. They had an open docket from 2012 up through 2019, where the science was brought in, all this critically important information. And when they closed their docket, they went, the FDA says it's okay, we don't have to pay any attention to this. As soon as their ruling to ignore that science hit the Federal Register, the lawsuits began. So they are being sued for ignoring the science. The Environmental Health Trust and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense are both suing the FCC. They had oral arguments at the end of January in front of 3 federal judges, and those judges were not impressed. Basically, they said, so what you're telling me is that the FCC, you don't have any experts who can address the health risks or the environmental risks. And then you relied on the FDA and they told you it was okay. Well, show us what the FDA did to conclude that. And I think they're coming up pretty empty. So we look forward to seeing what the federal court is going to do with lawsuits. And something that just has happened is the OTARD rule. This is the over-the-air radio frequency devices. So what the OTARD rule used to say is that you could have a one-way transmitter up on your roof. So you could have a satellite dish, right? Now what the industry and the FCC have done is to try and update that rule to say, now we can come in, we can go to your neighbor and say, hey, wouldn't you like to have the best technology ever? You know, you're going to be the hot kid on the block. We'll even give you a kickback if you put a cell tower antenna on your roof. That's what the OTARD rule does. It allows the industry, without any review by our towns, to come in and put a cell tower antenna, a small cell, a 4G, 5G small cell antenna right on your rooftop to spray the entire neighborhood with this radiation. So now they're getting sued too by the Children's Health Defense. That just happened in the last 2 weeks. This one here is really important for you to know about. So for years on our cell phone bills, we paid, or even our landline bills, we paid to bring safe, fast, reliable, sustainable, energy efficient technology to the premises through our phone bills. That means hardwired cable or copper or fiber optics right to the building. When wireless became much easier to install and highly profitable for the industry, they took that money that we already paid and they put it in their wireless bucket. So these guys, Bruce Kushnick and his team, went after that money and exposed the fraudulent accounting that the industry did. They won that lawsuit, and now they've opened it up so that our states can go back and reclaim that $500 billion, $500 billion they took of ours and never delivered the technology that we paid for. So as Dr. Schoechle will tell us in a little bit, there's great opportunity for our communities to go after that money to bring the right technology forward. And then with legal protections, as Ms. Symington will walk us through, the Americans with Disabilities Act provides for protections for people who are sick from radio frequency electromagnetic sensitivities. The Access Board already recognizes this. So most of our towns don't know that. All they hear is, oh, the telecom law says you can't talk about health. Well, this has nothing to do with the telecom law. These are other areas of our government that are protecting us. And so we need to roll those into our communities. Here in Massachusetts, there's an international boarding school where children were getting sick from the industrial strength Wi-Fi in the schools, which pretty much all of our schools have now. And for the first time in US courts, because of the expert testimony that was given by Dr. Carpenter and Dr. Herbert, they recognize that you don't have to have heat from a cell phone or a laptop or anything to have harm. And that's what our public radiation exposure limits are based on, is heat. How much heat from a device in a half an hour before it raises the temperature, but it has nothing to do with heat. We allow this much radiation at the thermal level, but the science is showing biological harms at the non-thermal level, hundreds of thousands of times below what we're still being pulsed with. So just recently too, at the Los Angeles Unified School District, there's a lawsuit there, and they too are recognizing these ADA protections. So important to know. And then this is the strongest policy that we've got in the United States. And we helped to get a bill passed in New Hampshire in 7 months' time that asks really pointed questions. Lo and behold, the insurance industry, Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, they have long since recognized that radio frequency is a huge risk, and they don't cover it in their policies. So the industry doesn't have coverage. So look for electropollution in your policies, anything you're signing, because you could be left holding the legal bag for risk. Again, why does that fine print tell us not to use these devices on our body? Why is the FCC ignoring the science? Why do they ignore the biological effects? Why do we allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries do? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effects? So look at a classroom. You've got 30 kids, 30 tablets, 30 cell phones, 30 wearables perhaps. You've got wireless access points on the ceiling, and nobody is accounting for any of this, let alone what we've all brought into our homes from all these different exposures. And so they got a bill passed in less than a year. And on November 1st, they just issued this groundbreaking report that calls out the conflicts of interest with industry and our federal agencies. And they make 15 recommendations to start educating and informing the public, to start protecting our children, our schools, our libraries, start tracking this radiation, measuring it, and really doing what we should have been doing all along, but never knew enough to do. So for you and I today, what can you do that's legal, right? All this is within your control. Turn everything off unless you absolutely have to use it. Forward your cell phone off to a landline. Make sure you get all those different antennas that are in your device, the cellular, the data, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth, the hotspot. Only use the device when you have to, right? And then let's be mindful of secondhand radiation, just like we ultimately did with secondhand smoke. Don't lock your poor pets into a room with a router and wonder why they're so high strung or wiped out, or their little hearts are giving out. We need to be aware of who we're exposing at all times. So it's not rocket science. Here's what safe technology looks like for you and I. In my house, we have a router from our internet service provider. On the back of the router, there are these little ports to plug Ethernet cables into. Here's an Ethernet cable. Look for a shielded one. That will have a wire, metal lining, like an aluminum lining or something inside. If you don't have that lining, and in commercial grade construction, everything is shielded, but in residential, it's not. And what that does is there are electric and magnetic fields aside from the radio frequency. The electric and magnetic fields are constantly traveling along those wires, and that radiates dirty electricity out into the room, like 6 or 8 feet into the room. So if you're going to learn to do this, you might as well learn to do it right and get shielded wires. Most of us have more than one device, maybe a laptop, a cell phone, you know, printer, whatever. This is just like a little extension cord for technology. You can plug in multiple little cables, again, Ethernet cables, not rocket science. And then who knew? You can buy an adapter for your iPhone or for your Android or for your MacBook or for your Chromebook or your iPad, 20, 30 bucks. It's not going to break the bank for most of us. And then you just go into the device, into the settings, and turn off every single one of those antennas, right? And get a landline, right? I went online, ordered this at Staples for like 30 bucks. I took out all those decked cordless phones when I realized, and I measured them, they're like having your own cell tower right there too. Got rid of all of those and just put these around the house. Perfectly safe technology, and you can forward your cell phone to it when you're not on the go. So I won't go into huge detail, but there are solutions at every turn today, which we didn't have, you know, 9 years ago when I fell down the rabbit hole. But look at this, we've got the medical training. We now have a website with Dr. Cindy Russell and her colleagues for Physicians for Safe Technology to go out and validate all of this. You'll see the science, you'll see what we can do. And then for our engineers and physicists and technologists and architects, again, solutions abound. When we did that conference, the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the NIH, they did a call for papers, and Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, collaborated with world-leading scientists and doctors, and they came out with a paper to teach our engineers, our architects, everybody how to build a safe environment. Even the IEEE, which is the Institute for Electronic and Electrical Engineers, which is the professional organization that set these standards back in the 80s, even they are starting to recognize that there is great harm here. So lots of resources. Here's a little scholastic sized book. You can sit down with your kids. Actually, it's a really good primer for adults too. You can whip through it in 5-10 minutes. And then this nonprofit, we've got a schools and families course, a corporate course, and then this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. A lot of people can watch this through their libraries. If your library subscribes to Canopy or Hoopla, you can watch it for free with your library card, or you can just download it for a couple of bucks. But it was part of the United Nations Film Festival. It won Best Documentary at the DC Independent Film Festival and the Women's Independent Film Festival. So we just have so many terrific resources once we tune into this. And look at this, even Bert Wolf, who does a travel show on PBS, did 2 episodes on wireless radiation. So it's really starting to come mainstream. The wheels are coming off the bus for the wireless industry. So now is the time for our towns to really start taking control. 5gcrisis.com has a toolkit. There is a sample local ordinance that all of our towns can sit down with their lawyers, maybe bring in a telecom lawyer who really understands this, and you've got some great tools to get started with. And again, you know, we've all been sold on all Wi-Fi all the time. It's time we step back and say, what's actually healthy, right? Excessive screen time is not. We need to set limits for ourselves, set that good example for our children. I love this poster. I keep it posted next to my desk to remind me to get away from the computer. All these wonderful things that we always did to connect with ourselves and with others. And then there's a lot of science now showing that the earth provides electrons that help to neutralize a lot of this man-made energy. So get back outside, right? If you live like I do and there's still a foot of snow on the ground here, I can't very well go take off my feet and walk on the grass. But who knew, if you just go out and hold the leaves or the needles or the high water content areas, you are instantly grounded. And there's a lot of healing energy through grounding. So just know solutions abound. So what does this mean for La Plata County? And again, these are all recommendations and suggestions. We hope you'll look at them one by one and decide who in your community would best be suited to take on each piece of these recommendations. In Burlington, Massachusetts, when they did their small cell policy, they did a townwide committee. They had their board of health, they had their zoning, they had their planning, they had their selectmen, and all their critical committees came together and they did this together. So I hope that might give some encouragement. But the first thing, don't take our word on any of this. You need to sit down and look at this and really investigate what's going on. I've done a page for municipal leaders. I kind of wanted to put myself in your shoes, like, what do you hear? What are you up against? What do you need to know? So if you want to, feel free to go out here and use this for municipal leaders as a launch point. But critically important, we need to differentiate what the industry's priorities are versus what's in the best interest of the public. That should be our starting point, and that should be the high level goal. And then we come up with best practices for how to do that. The Centers for Disease Control already has something called the ALARA principle. That's to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And they have that already for ionizing radiation. That's where we know things can break the bond on the atom. And that's for X-rays in the sun. You know, you'd never leave your kid out in the sun for 24 hours a day. What are we doing leaving them in this electrosmog for 24 hours a day? So we should really work with our governments to use the ALARA principle and the precautionary principle. And again, you need to have the data. You have to measure what these exposures are, and don't fall into the trap with the FCC saying, oh, these exposures are well within the FCC guidelines, because they were never biologically safety tested. But we know what to test for. You can go out to the Building Biology Institute or Safe Living Technologies. They offer products to help you get the meters that you need. And they have on their websites what the recommended building biology levels are. So that's all there for you, easily accessible. There are people trained in this that you can bring in to go around and take measurements and help you figure out how to get to safe technology. So the specific asks for today are to amend the telecom code to include a mapping of where all these antennas are, to monitor the emissions, and to just go out to 5gcrisis.com, look at their toolkit, see what this checklist is for municipal codes to address these small cell antenna installations, and say, okay, wow, maybe we do need to think about prioritizing where these can go, how far back they can be, and they just got a lot of really good recommendations for you. Critically important is to notify the public by certified mail in advance before any wireless infrastructure, big cell, small cell, smart meters, any of that, we should have the public engaged, and especially those who've already identified as electromagnetically sensitive, disabled, because they are not going to survive in a space where this radiation is pulsing. And then one of the recommendations from New Hampshire that I know the folks in La Plata would like to see is create low radio frequency safe zones. Carve out areas in your community where you can't have wireless infrastructure, so people have a safe place to live. There's a company called Cityscape that can help you to develop a wireless master plan, and then update the building code, which is separate from the telecom code, but update the building code to comply with Americans with Disabilities Act. And then look at EMS safe, affordable housing and transition shelters. So if somebody's gotten really sick, where can they go? you would not believe how many thousands of people wind up in their cars because there is no safe space for them to go. So we're just at one point in time, and we are at the point in time where it's now important in our communities to create these safe spaces, because again, this is cumulative. It's not going away. The more we continue to expose, the greater the degree of sickness we're going to see. And then let's get the community education going. At the municipal level, Dr. Schoechle will be teaching us about reinventing wires, the future of landlines and networks. And he wrote this policy book, which is free and available online. Wireless education, we've got a corporate course that covers the legal risk as well as the health risks. And then the medical conference, we can quickly train your fire and rescue and your police. I understand that they need to get continuing education down at the firehouse. And when I mentioned it to my local firefighters, they were really excited. They're like, oh yeah, we got to get credits. And now that it's a virtual conference, we can do it from the fire station. No travel money involved, no time away from the station involved. They can do it on their own time. And especially for our healthcare providers, so they quit misdiagnosing all these electrical sensitivities. And then educate the schools as soon as we can. And I'm just tickled at the timing of today's presentation, because tomorrow there is a new project that just launched this month called Tech Safe Schools. And they have a whole toolkit built for how to help our schools learn about the science, learn about the legal risks of exposing the kids and the staff to this radiation. And then they've got a remediation specialist, a building biologist, who's going to be giving the third workshop. So they've got 3 workshops coming up this month. The legal one was 7 attorneys from all over the country who are experts in wireless radiation. They're all going to be participating tomorrow. So jump on this one today, go register and learn along with them. And then again, we've got these off-the-shelf courses built. We can train your schools in a half an hour online. And it kicks out a handy tip sheet and a certificate of compliance for tracking risk management training. And everybody should know, Cyprus, the Mediterranean country of Cyprus, just released guidelines for keeping children safe during this pandemic. Hardwire the technology. It's not rocket science. If you can't hardwire, create as much distance from those routers as you can and only turn them on when you need them. Don't leave them pulsing. Okay, and then educate the community. You know, let's do more forums like this. We did one here in Massachusetts. A Tri-County Health Board brought me in to give a presentation. I would love to help with other forums like this. Let's start bringing this information to our professional associations. Here in Massachusetts, I've been speaking with the Association of School Committees, the building inspectors, the MMA, which is the Municipal Association, the Teachers Association, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Electrical Workers Union, because they're getting harmed as they install all of this. So I've also been working with our Department of Public Health. So you guys think about it. Where can we bring in the information and really, really start educating at the grassroots? Because it's not going to change quickly enough at the federal level, and it's certainly not happening fast enough at the state level. So we need to do, Dr. Cindy Russell, who founded Physicians for Safe Technology, talks about the hamburger approach. Certainly keep educating at the state and federal level, but at the grassroots level, that's where action happens. So somewhere we'll meet in the middle. But, contact your legislators. As a town, as medical professionals, you guys carry weight. I understand that there's now a petition to get fiber to the premises. So contact the LPEA and support all of that. And if you want to contact me, by all means, anybody, contact me anytime. Here's 3 ways you can find me. Contact your own local folks. La Plata for Safe Technology, there's an email address here. And then Coloradans for Safe Technology, this is their website. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. And I would like to now introduce Virginia Farver. So Virginia is a very courageous woman, one of my huge heroes, who lost a son to radio frequency microwave radiation. Can I ask everybody, if you're not speaking, can you please mute yourselves? Because otherwise, if there's any background information, you become the big person that we see. So Deborah, if you could mute yours, that would be very helpful. And anybody else. So Virginia, go ahead and take it.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'd like to address 5 school cancer clusters that I've been involved with. One concerned my son as well. And just to let you know, however, these cancer clusters at schools are becoming a more and more, it's no longer an isolated event. I lost a son in 2008 from glioblastoma brain cancer. And at the time, the neurosurgeon in San Diego told us it was from his cell phone. And our neurosurgeon told us that it was not genetic. So in other words, it was environmental. Rich was a student at SDSU, and about 10 months after he passed, I found that he was involved in a brain cancer cluster of people on campus. And with SDSU, I'm going to start with the fact that in 1993, there was a gentleman by the name of Richard Funston that passed away from brain cancer at SDSU. And there was a cell tower that was above Nestor Hall, room 131. And the cell tower was taken down in 1995. In 2002, they installed another cell tower, and there had been several complaints about illegal emissions. This one cell tower to this day transmits 72 miles in all directions. The cell tower itself is called Heparin. It stands for High Performance Wireless Research and Educational Network. And in 2008, 4 men were diagnosed with brain cancer who all worked in Nestor Hall, room 131. One was my son, of course. And anyway, that is the first. I won't get into what's all on the cell tower. I can tell you that this cell tower is mission control for San Diego Gas and Electric, and that's why I'm in the film Take Back Your Power. So if you haven't seen that, it's takebackyourpower.net. At the same time as SDSU, there was a breast cancer cluster at UC San Diego. And so I found the confidential report on that. And this involved 15 people, 8 women between the years of 2000 and 2006 that came down with aggressive forms of breast cancer. They were all located in the literature building in one office, and this one office was sandwiched between the electrical room for the whole building and an old elevator. And they found really, really high levels of dirty electricity throughout the building with this. And so, of course, nothing happened. And in 2016, faculty and staff got together and wrote a resolution, and I have that as well if anybody wants it. Where another young gal, 34, came down with an aggressive breast cancer. So anyway, yes, that was the next one. And anyway, Dr. Lika Kiefetz and Jim Turman from San Diego Gas and Electric were put in charge of the investigation into this cancer cluster, this breast cancer cluster at UC San Diego. So I call that the fox guarding the hen house. And so anyway, we go on to, I talked to Dr. Sam Milham. He is an EMR specialist in 2009. And I asked him for help at SDSU. And he told me on the phone he could not help me because he had offered his services for free to UC San Diego to investigate the breast cancer cluster that was that had happened there, and they denied him access. But he went on to tell me that he did a study at a La Quinta Middle School in California and found very, very high levels of dirty electricity throughout the school. And this was in 2004. Well, the school district threatened to sue Dr. Milham, so he backed off. And he told me, he said, I backed off knowing that there were going to be more people harmed. So that has always really bothered him. So anyway, in 2015, another cancer cluster was announced at La Quinta Middle School. And I heard between 50 and 100 new cancer cases since 2004 have occurred. And with that, now the school's checking into things finally. But a lot of these children that were diagnosed with cancers are now young adults fighting for their lives. And in 2010, at Kelly Elementary School in Carlsbad, California, I found the same epidemiologist, Dr. Thomas Mack. He works for the state of California. He wrote the report for SDSU and also wrote it for Kelly Elementary School, where there were several kids that have come down with different types of cancers. And so I found out that epidemiology reports are literally bogus statistical reports, and all of these schools deserved toxicology studies. So upon further research with Kelly Elementary School, I found out that there were huge, I've got pictures of them, high-powered electrical lines that go within 430 feet of the center of the school. And then in 2013, when I took the, investigated it, there were 59 cell towers and 219 antennas within a 4-mile radius of this school. And so now this brings us to Rocky Mountain High School here in Fort Collins. In 2018, they announced a cancer cluster. Now this was just a blip on the radar with the media. They did one segment on it, and that was the last I heard of it. But 6 kids within 2 years have come down with cancers, and a few of them have passed away. In 2018, August of 2018, a girl by the name of I got her name down here, just a second. Kate Pruitt, sorry. She's the one who died in 2018 of glioblastoma brain cancer. And in fall of 2019, her cousin, Maddie Pruitt, committed suicide at CU Boulder. And I've got Maddie's obituary right here if anybody would like to read it. But she was suffering for years from constant vomiting, fatigue, headaches, and dizziness. So I think she had been misdiagnosed. And I think that her symptoms were all EHS symptoms, but she had been suffering, and they took her out of CU, and they took her and she went to school in Hawaii, and she seemed to be doing okay in Hawaii at sea level. And she lasted a few months, and then she became sick again. So they brought her back to CU Boulder, and that fall she committed suicide. So this is becoming a very, very common occurrence, unfortunately. And, you know, at Rocky Mountain High School, there are cell towers that are behind the school on the ball field. And of course, the school is filled with industrial Wi-Fi. So I'm expecting, unfortunately, this to be happening more and more. And I personally, at this point, would not have a child in a school that had Wi-Fi or cell towers anywhere nearby. And, you know, I think that our children are our future, and we've got to fight for their future. Thank you.
Virginia, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Next, I would like to introduce Deborah Shisler. She is a retired school teacher and a proud grandmother, a 30-year La Plata County resident, and an advocate for safer technology and wired schools. Oh, can you unmute? Unmute?
Not too tech savvy here. I taught 2nd through 5th grade for 30 years. I loved what I did. I retired in 2004, long before Wi-Fi was ever introduced in the schools. In 2011, my husband gave me an iPad for Christmas. About 2 weeks later, I noticed that being in front of it made me dizzy and nauseous. This experience perked my interest in the science of wireless and the possible hazards, especially to our most vulnerable. I began researching and asking questions. A friend introduced me to a kindergarten teacher who'd been teaching for around 25 years. I was curious and I asked her if she had noticed a difference in teaching today and how it was 25 years ago. She stared at me for a second and said, "Yes, honestly, most days I feel like I have to scrape the kids off the ceiling." It wasn't long after that I was stunned to find that even toddlers were being exposed. I witnessed a 2-year-old looking at a picture book, and instead of turning the page, she slid her finger across it as if it were an iPad. Everyone found it amusing. My mind, however, went straight to the kindergarten class. To me, it spoke volumes. On an extended trip to New York City, the light finally came on for me. While walking all over the city, I noticed caregivers and parents with their children. Nearly every adult was connected to their cell phone and not their child. I suddenly realized that we were an addicted society and our children were the unfortunate victims. Most parents were simply unaware. In Katie Singer's book, An Electronic Silent Spring, according to a 2011 survey of 20,000 students, 20% of third graders had cell phones, 40% of fifth graders, and 83% of middle school students. On average, 8 to 10-year-olds spend close to 8 hours daily with a variety of media. In older children and teens, it rose to 11 hours daily. This was a decade ago. What would those numbers be today? This exposure of wireless radiation is accumulative and harmful over time. Children are not little adults. They have thinner skulls, so EMFs penetrate further into their brains. Their immune systems are undeveloped. Their cells are dividing more rapidly, thus they are more vulnerable to toxins. Symptoms may include chronic fatigue, headaches, migraines, vertigo, tinnitus, arrhythmia, nosebleeds, allergies, asthma, concentration and memory problems, and learning and behavioral disorders, and more. Dr. Nicholas Carderas is a psychologist, internationally known speaker, and author of the book Glow Kids, the seminal book on the clinical, neurological, and sociological aspects of technology addiction that has been translated into 10 languages. He has worked with thousands of children, teens, and young adults and advocated that screen addiction be recognized as a clinical disorder akin to substance addiction. There now exists residential digital detox centers for teens and young adults. Dr. Carderas treats ADHD, aggression, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts and actions, and even psychosis. He calls this digital dystopia. How is this happening? For one thing, our children's bodies and brains don't get a break. Wi-Fi may be on in the home 24/7 and on in school all day long. Some even have Wi-Fi on the school bus. According to overpowered author Dr. Martin Blank, by the time children graduate from high school, they have been exposed to 13,000 hours of Wi-Fi radiation in the schools that could have been avoided if they were connected by a hardwired system. A hardwired connection makes all the difference. Critical to children's healthy development is meaningful social interaction, lots of imaginative play, and valuable connections to the real natural world. We as parents and grandparents need to model healthy technology habits, provide hardwired connections at home, and strive for hardwired connections in our schools and give the children a break. B. Blake Levitt, award-winning medical and scientific journalist, suggested, we can only hope that government regulatory agencies will soon assume their proper responsibility for protecting our future generations. But for now, it's up to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. All right, let's now hear from Andrea. She is in Colorado Springs and the mother of an EMS disabled son, Ian, who requires special education and homeschooling. She advocates for electromagnetic sensitivity disabled children. Andrea, if you can unmute yourself.
Hey everybody. I have a 9-year-old son who has some genetic predispositions for electromagnetic sensitivity, EMS. He was severely injured as a child and is disabled for life and needs special education in an EMS safe classroom. He can't tolerate exposure to wireless radiation. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to talk about.
That's okay. Take a moment if you need.
I'm sorry. Classrooms, libraries, schools, stores, and other places where radiation is high. I haven't been able to work a normal job in years to be proactive with his care and keeping him alive. He has suffered this through 3 school districts and medical systems that will not do anything to try to understand or accommodate this. As I have learned to understand more about him and the differences he has with multiple diagnoses, I've experienced tremendous adversity within the systems. He has had many medically disruptive experiences in his school where I had to pick him up early because he couldn't adapt to the environment. He received no accommodation in one school, and his condition soon began to have an effect on his ability to walk. It was so scary I had to withdraw him. At his current school, I have asked for an EMS safe protocol in his learning environment. The school would not allow me to meet with the people who are in charge of technology and have put up walls. This inability for him to receive an education amongst his peers is isolating, segregating, and a form of discrimination. We are trying to work outside in the outdoor classroom on nice days when the teacher has time to work with him and teach me how to work with him at home. His teacher has a 2-way radio to have a way to connect to her indoor classroom. It would be easier to have classrooms that are safe for EMS disabled children. Here are some photos of what the rashes look like after a typical classroom exposure and what his headaches look like. If his body could speak when he's exposed, it would say, "You're hurting me." And if he could express himself clearly, he would say, "This hurts." Instead, I watch what happens later. I look for the rashes first, and if the exposures continue for a long time, for a long duration, he experiences the rashes to his face, ears, and then has an increased risk of a seizure and potentially heart problems. It's scary. When it goes on for a long time, I begin to see changes in his gut, his mood, learning, motor function, and behavioral baseline. Daily typical classroom exposure leads to headaches where he postures in the way seen in the picture, where he's outside, sitting with his hand on his head. Many of my questions and concerns are being ignored by the medical and education systems. I would like leaders like you to learn about the biological harm of wireless radiation and safer use of technology, to do so as much as possible to protect our children and their futures. We need schools to be wired and able to accommodate EMS disabled kids. There has been no safety testing for wireless radiation in children. Please, let's apply the precautionary principle. Thank you.
Andrea, thank you so much for your courage to come and share that with us today. We know it's not hard when it comes down to our own children. We will do anything, and we need the supports in our society to help us, to help you, to help Ian. So I hope that La Plata will take those types of measures. And next, I'd like to introduce you to Sheena Symington. She's the director of the ElectroSensitive Society, where she helps people who have electromagnetic sensitivity. She has a background in biological and environmental sciences, and she's also been researching chemical and electromagnetic pollutants and their effects on nature and human ecosystems for many years. She also works with world-renowned Dr. Magda Havas, Professor Emeritus from Trent University in Canada. And she gives talks related to electromagnetic hygiene to educate people on how to maintain an electromagnetically clean environment. Sheena has published on both the harmful effects of electromagnetic radiation, as well as the healing effect of electromagnetic therapies. Sheena, if you could unmute yourself, we're so honored to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing your experiences today. Very moving and so much appreciated. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes. I might shorten my talk a little bit because we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'll just go through it quickly here. First of all, what causes EMS? We found that there are some common precursors, one of which is physical trauma to the central nervous system. Another one is chemical exposure, pesticides, drugs, even tattoos, mercury fillings, etc. Electrical exposure can also predispose you to becoming EMS through electrical shocks or lightnings, or really extreme exposure through power lines, antennas, Wi-Fi, mobile phones, etc. Or biological trauma, if you have mold exposure, high parasite load, Lyme disease. And finally, an impaired immune system sets you up as a precursor as well, whether it's being the very young or the very old. And like you were saying, we really desperately need to protect our children. What are some of the symptoms? So a lot of people say, how can one thing create all of these symptoms? It really depends on how your immune system functions, and more importantly, doesn't function in the presence of electromagnetic fields and frequencies. So again, you can read through all of the different examples, and Andrea just presented some information on her son, probably heart palpitations, really severe headaches, migraines, and a number of different things, and skin issues is another very significant response. There are some key issues facing those who are EMS, and medical is one of them. Finding a medical assistance of a doctor that one can diagnose and treat you, but also is just sympathetic and aware of electromagnetic sensitivity or EMS. So there's an ICD, an International Code of Diseases /10. So it brings a little bit of legitimacy to people who have EHS or EMS and can be diagnosed with that in a medical facility. More importantly, or as importantly, not only do they need to be diagnosed and treated, but they really need to be accommodated. It's really hard to access any medical help if you can't actually go into their clinic or office because of the EMF and EMR exposure. So really what we need is a medical alert bracelet that educates the medical facilities and the medical practitioners, as well as the first responders, on how to accommodate somebody with EMS. So again, it's been diagnosed as identified as a disability in Sweden, in the US, and in Canada. And as of 2025 in Ontario here in Canada, we want a fully accessible Ontario. So that means providing options of how to reduce your exposure and allow people with EMS the accessibility to medical accommodation. So currently there's very little, if any, medical access for those who are sensitive to these frequencies. So EMS as a disability. The disability is a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So that's the definition of a disability. And EMS experience adverse health effects, and they experience them from cell phones, smart meters, Wi-Fi, anything wireless, as well as electromagnetic fields, as well as dirty electricity. So the ADA provides for public access for disabled people, and wireless radiation poses an access barrier for those who are EMS disabled. So we really need to look at updating the building codes of 2005 to accommodate those with EMS. It's not just a choice, it's a necessity. So there is information that is available on exactly how to do this. We just have to encourage communities and different medical facilities, et cetera, to update the 2005 guidelines in their building codes. Often one of the barriers to people becoming accommodated for electrical hypersensitivity or electromagnetic sensitivity is some people say, oh, it's just a psychological response rather than a biological response. So I'm just going to present three examples of how this is a biological response. I'm going to look at live blood analysis, heart rate variability monitoring, and a little bit about plant growth and Wi-Fi. So first of all, looking at live blood, Dr. Havis at the Rose Lab here pricks a finger, puts the blood on a slide and looks at it underneath the microscope. So this is Dr. Havis's blood before Wi-Fi exposure. All of the cells are independent from each other and floating around. After 10 minutes of Wi-Fi exposure, this is what her blood looks like. It's all clumped together, and this is referred to as rouleau. So Dr. Stephen Sinatra, one of the world's leading integrative cardiologists, says that our blood should be the consistency of red wine. When it's in rouleau formation, it's actually the consistency of ketchup. So this can lead to a lot of symptoms such as headaches, difficulty concentrating, numbness, and heart problems. So many people that Dr. Havis and I work with were complaining of heart problems. So Dr. Havis started to look at this, and this is a little news clip from Global 16x9 when she was interviewed about her heart rate variability monitoring.
Well, 16x9 wanted to test the power of Wi-Fi, so we went to visit environmental scientist Magda Havis from Trent University to do another test. Professor Havis's subject, Martin, who calls himself electrically sensitive, is hooked up to a heart monitor, and Havis sets up a wireless computer.
Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Martin and exposing him to microwave radiation from Wi-Fi, the same type of thing that we have in schools, for example, and just monitoring his heart to see if his heart reacts to any of the radiation. He won't know when things are turned on or off, so it's going to be a blind study in that regard.
With the Wi-Fi plugged in, Martin's heart rate accelerates in mere moments.
Now I can feel something that's going through my chest. I can feel it down my legs too.
The closer the router is, the greater his reaction.
A few seconds ago, it was like my chest was actually jumping in the middle here.
Then, seconds after the wireless internet is unplugged, just like that, his heart rate slows down. Martin, how are you feeling right now?
Fine, I don't think there's anything on.
But listen to this. Those levels Martin was exposed to, well, they're acceptable according to safety code 6. So if they're safe, why was his heart racing? Magda Havis has a theory.
So some percentage of the population is reacting to these microwave radiation at levels well below safety code 6.
But I'm not sick from Wi-Fi and I use it all the time.
Well, not everyone has the same sensitivities. We have children who have peanut allergies. We have people who are allergic to pollen. They react to pollen. And it's same with electrical sensitivity. Only a percentage of the population react.
So just to give you an idea of how many people are affected with EHS or EMS, EHS is what we refer to it here in Canada, 3% of the population is severely impacted. Not being able to access public spaces, not being able to go to a hospital. In La Plata County, with the population of 56,000, that is 1,686 people who are severely debilitated. And so these numbers really can't be ignored. And the 3 to 5% and the moderate symptoms of 35%, those are actually numbers that are quite a few years old. So it could even be higher percentages right now. Looking at plants, we exposed peas to Wi-Fi for 30 days. And you can see the Wi-Fi exposed plants on the left didn't grow nearly as well as the ones on the right. And look at what happened to the root system. The root system literally didn't develop in the Wi-Fi exposed plants. And you can see here where the red arrow is located is where the router was. The Wi-Fi was located in that direction. So the plants literally grew away from the router. The controls just grew straight up, and the light for both the Wi-Fi exposed and the control obviously was directly above. So it was literally like it was avoiding the Wi-Fi router radiation. And again, it's peer reviewed, published, and you can look at this journal article online. Another key issue affecting people with EMS is housing. So we critically need low EMF, MCS friendly, and mold free spaces. As already was mentioned, we need to have cell tower free areas. We need to have choice for those who want to have low EMF areas, but we also need the option for people who need that. It's not just a choice, it's an absolute critical need. Currently, as Cece was saying, people are living out of their cars. They are literally becoming homeless. Some of them are using RVs and trailer and container homes or tiny homes, because then if a tower does go up, they can actually move this mobile device to a safer place. They're literally becoming EMF refugees and in great need for an EMF shelter. So often people all of a sudden are diagnosed or impacted negatively by these wireless frequencies, and they have nowhere to go. We really need an EMF shelter that provides safe medical care and food and care for these people. And again, it's been severely complicated with COVID, because sometimes when these people are homeless, they rely on showers, public showers and facilities that are currently closed because of COVID. How to accommodate? I'll just go through this really quickly because it's already been talked about quite a bit. In Ontario here, I've been able to accommodate somebody with EMS in 6 different hospitals. So we've been able to accommodate somebody in a cancer clinic for 6 weeks for cancer treatment. We put up an RF blocking canopy. We worked with all of the different departments of security, information technology, building biologists, and measured the hospitals. And we're able to accommodate those needing care at a hospital facility. We've had success in schools, colleges, universities. We can turn off the wireless devices or power down the devices to 16%. And they were actually saying that they worked better when they were powered down. So they were still providing access, but really minimizing exposure for those of the students that needed it. And again, just turning things off. One thing that we've done is we've given the meter that Cece was demonstrating, we've actually given that to the teachers, and they become the accommodators and saying, oh, no, you forgot to turn your cell phone off, or, oh, you have to leave. They have like a little caddy inside the door where everybody puts their cell phones and turns them off. And then if they need to do something, they leave the classroom and go out and do their, call their parents or whatever. But we're really minimizing that access in those public schools and in private schools as well. So again, how to increase access for those who are EHS in public places. And like Cece said, it's not rocket science. And we have a duty to accommodate these people in public settings. We need to have these cell tower free areas. So communities need to maintain underserviced areas currently, or removing wireless technology from places that allow people who are EMS to access. In Ontario here in Peterborough, in the city, we have an electromagnetic hypersensitivity tip sheet. So we actually help people provide deep tips on how to host a meeting that provides a fully accessible meeting with respect to electromagnetic fields. And again, it's wiring it. And when you turn it off where you can, but if you need to have access, we're not reducing the access, especially to the internet. We're just accommodating, just as we would with a smoking or putting in wheelchair access into a community. And again, Timothy Schoechle will identify some of the tips that he has promoted with his reinventing wires, and creating a proactive antenna siting protocol is critical for communities. And again, we'll send you links of these on how to do it. In Ontario and in Canada, we have a number of communities, a number of advocacy groups that are supporting the Canadians for Safe Technology through Frank Clegg's group. And again, at the ElectroSensitive Society, I really provide support. It's a very lonely place. Like, imagine being affected so dramatically by something that everybody in the world seems to be addicted to. So again, I support people with EHS and electromagnetic sensitivity. I have a support group. So if you or some of your loved ones need some support with this this disability, please contact me at the electrosensitivesociety.com. And I'll help you. I help people become accommodated in work settings, in hospitals, in schools. We've had varying levels of success in all of those components. So I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Thank you.
Sheena, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful overview, and thank you for the services that you provide to so many. If you'd be so kind as to stop the screen sharing on your end, then we will go ahead and introduce Ron Margolis. He's a 35-year resident of La Plata County. He's very active in the community. He's been a former member of the City Planning Commission and has worked in the legal arena in the background. Ron, are you with us?
I am.
Okay.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
First, I'm going to be reading a paper that Diana Losaco of Lakewood, Colorado wrote, and I've been asked to read that, and then I'll offer a few of my own comments at the end. So she says, "My name is Diana Losaco. I'm a Colorado native, longtime business owner and resident of the city of Lakewood, Colorado. In 2019, Lakewood City Council was tasked with having to amend their city ordinance governing wireless and broadband infrastructures as a result of changes to federal and state laws. More specifically, as it related to 5G wireless services. The overreaching demands of these changes in laws became the source of concern for city and county legislatures, as well as citizens in Lakewood and throughout the country. It quickly became clear that this issue would impact the future of our city in ways that deserve serious debate, discussion, and careful studies. A group of Lakewood citizens formed a volunteer task force of which I was involved. The goal of the task force was to collaborate with elected officials and to encourage citizen awareness and advocacy in an effort to bring about the best options possible for a safe and secure build out of broadband infrastructure and wireless services in our community. After months of collective volunteer work, helping to draft a proposed citizen-friendly ordinance, participating and listening to our city councilors, staffs, and attorneys attempt to wade through mountains of legal and technical issues, one single sentence became the mantra used over and over throughout the entire process. Our hands are tied. How to untie our hands became a primary focus. Our hands are tied are words reiterated by every city and county legislature as a direct result of the 2018 FCC order and Colorado HB 17-1193, which regulate wireless permitting and installation in our state. These laws preempt local authority and significantly limit the ability of municipalities to regulate the deployment of small cell 5G infrastructure within their jurisdiction. The laws, in the name of streamlining, and the one-size-fits-all wireless policies have been met with resentment, resistance, and have not only stripped away the ability for cities to address their unique needs, but have shortchanged many rural communities. They set into motion a multitude of lawsuits against the FCC. Citizens and local legislatures are given little say, and industry is allowed broad sweeping powers. That being said, as we learned in Lakewood, the laws did leave us some crumbs. Those crumbs are the city and county codes and design standards. Examining and improving the requirements and language in our codes allowed us to maximize, within the parameters of federal and state law, the ability and options of how and where small cell infrastructure gets deployed within our jurisdiction. As a single example, industry may want to deploy small cell towers every 250 feet in residential areas. Lakewood had a provision in their code of no less than 600 feet. They, our city, also, through the ordinance making process, stated clearly preferential locations for cell towers, antennas, etc., to maximize deployment in residential areas. Heights of towers, distancing, setbacks, aesthetics, noise, liability, citizen notification, and compliance of RF emission standards, to name a few, became clearly defined and addressed in our codes and ordinance. Without clear and defined codes relative to this kind of deployment allows the industry to basically run the show. As a Colorado native, my concern regarding the proliferation of wireless infrastructure and how we safely and securely build that infrastructure didn't just end with my concerns for Lakewood. I am equally concerned for all cities in our state. How you decide to create your codes and regulations relative to telecommunication facilities does matter. Your decisions can and will radically change La Plata's landscape, soundscape, and the environment of one of the most beautiful parts of our state. Danah Barlow, Lakewood, Colorado resident and Colorado citizen for Safe Technology. And here are a couple of my comments. Back in early 2020, as I was learning more about the nationwide movement toward 5G, I heard of several La Plata County residents who thought that their health was being negatively impacted by the existing cell towers and antennas already existing in the county. As a concerned citizen, I went to the county offices out at the tech center to attempt to determine the location, frequencies, and line of sight of some of these towers, hoping to help identify the towers that were perhaps harming some of our citizenry. I was also attempting to find out which companies were the carriers of those antennas. I was rather astonished to be told that the county did not have this kind of information readily available. I was told that the computer systems that held this kind of information had been updated and changed over the years, so much so that this might easily require some weeks to gather this information from me, and that it might cost me a pretty big sum as well. Now imagine, if you will, that a county resident, perhaps one already having a pre-existing disability, was being harmed by one of these broadcast frequencies at his or her home, and was therefore not easily able to escape the frequencies. That person could easily become severely injured or even killed by these broadcast frequencies. This could easily result in a lawsuit being brought against the county, as the county would be considered the licensing body that had approved the tower and antennas in the first place, and those were the very things that were causing the harm. I've read that two of the largest and oldest insurance companies in the world, Swiss Re and Lloyd's of London, have announced they will not be insuring 5G injuries. I wonder what they know that we do not. But this is certainly an indicator that they believe real harm is happening, or at least possible, from these towers and antennas, and it's not worth risking their wealth to insure against this happening. Therefore, I would urge the county commissioners to require that all telecom carriers operating within this county carry their own liability insurance for this type of occurrence. This would ensure the very solvency of La Plata County, the county that we're all concerned with. These carriers should also be required to provide the county with the frequency they are broadcast at, as well as the direction the frequency is being broadcast. Furthermore, any changes desired to be made to the frequencies and directionality by the carriers should be undertaken only after going through some sort of approval process mandated by the county. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Margolis, for that letter, as well as for your own personal insights and for investigating this on behalf of your community. That's wonderful.
Cece, if I could interrupt for a moment, please. I'm Chuck Stevens. I'm the county manager. So we are a little bit over time. I'm happy to stay on. I can probably stay on for another 5 minutes or so, maybe till 10 past.
Okay.
I don't know how many other speakers you have, but for county staff, if you need to drop off, and I see some of you have, if you need to drop off now, please feel free to do so, and I'll be happy to stay until about 10 past. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize for running over. Danah, do you have additional information that has not been presented thus far? Oh, you need to unmute, please.
Yes, Danah needs to speak. But Danah, you need to unmute your microphone.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. This is my first time talking on a Zoom thing. So I avoid the computer as much as possible. Anyways, this was really interesting so far to me. Sheena's information about people who are disabled by EMS. I thought about this. I have PTSD, I have head trauma, I've had chemical exposure, and I had an electrical line that La Plata Electric upgraded their line from Bayfield to Vallecito probably in the early 80s, and they decided instead of putting it across the road from me, putting it right next to my house. Later, the woman who bought my house from me developed brain cancer. And so I think about all these exposures. I am the proverbial canary in the coal mine, and I've lived in La Plata County for 44 years. So I am speaking for people who are disabled and the fact that we need some protections. First of all, I would like to say that I know a lot of people who are disabled to some degree by EMFs, and I know a lot of other people who I think are disabled, but they don't yet know it. They don't know what their symptoms are from, but they have little things that are cues for me, like people who are sensitive to chemical odors are most often sensitive to EMFs as well. These are people who have terrible anxiety and insomnia and migraines or brain fog, unexplained heart palpitations. These often are people with brain tumors, autoimmune disorders, and other diseases. You probably know all this information right now from television and wherever, that doctors are saying that the root of all disease is inflammation. And we are pretty sure that EMFs are a huge source of inflammation. Well, we know it, but I'll just say we know that. It took me a long time to figure out that my cell phone and computer were deeply affecting my quality of life. It was when I was working with one of my clients, I was an interior designer, still am a little bit, that helped me make the connection. About 9 years ago, I had a client who was building a special house. She was incredibly sensitive, and so she had to pick a location away from cell towers and lots of, well, anything connected to electricity. And she built a house with materials that were non-toxic and shielding for her walls, EMF paint, so that signals couldn't come through the walls, and also put her electrical wires in conduit so there wouldn't be any ionizing things going on with dirty electricity. And anyway, it was really interesting for me. I had never been around that before, but I began to make a connection to my own situation. And she taught me a lot, actually. One of the things she taught me was that if you are in a car, it's a metal box. And so if you are on your phone, it's magnifying all of your exposure to the EMFs. And I saw the correlation between my insomnia and my anxiety to the time that I spent in the car making phone calls to clients and to contractors and all the people that you connect with, you know, when you have those free moments in a business. Anyway, over the years, I have dramatically reduced my personal exposure. My computer is hardwired. My cell phone is carried in a Faraday bag, and I try to use it as little as possible and almost never in my car. And I actually now have a true landline. I used to think that having a cordless phone was great, and I now know that having a cordless phone is as bad or worse than using a cell phone. So anyway, fast forward to the present, where cell phones, very powerful ones like the iPhones that produce a scary amount of radiation. If you have a meter and you have a new iPhone, you would be shocked if you tested it. Anyway, there are wireless security systems, Ring doorbells, cameras everywhere. About a year ago, I attended a homeowners meeting, and it was in the rec center in a small room. There were 25 people, and that meeting only lasted an hour, which was really a good thing for me. but there were at least 20 phones sitting out in front of us in that small room. And my feeling was, why in the world, when you're supposed to be paying attention, are you sitting there with your phone, you know, ready to pick it up at a moment's notice? Plus you're irradiating me. There was a comment made during that meeting that really caught my attention. Someone was talking about the smart meter that was put on one of the buildings, and other people started making fun of people who, you know, thought they needed to wear tinfoil hats. And I thought, well, that would be me. So anyway, I wish that people could just see the numbers on a meter. I really do. I think it would change everybody's attitude about this. Anyway, there's rampant ignorance about it, and it's affecting not us, but the entire natural world, all of the animals. I don't know if you've noticed the uptick in the number of cancers. I had 5 friends die of cancer last year in the period of 5 months. And I've also had so many friends who've lost their beloved dog at age 5 or age 6, very, very young from cancer, but nobody's putting these ideas together, you know. And let me just tell you another story about a client friend who I was pretty sure she was sensitive. You can normally tell, like I said, from people who are sensitive to chemical odors, but there were other things like she had sensitivities to foods. I do too. And, you know, you just kind of, once you are that person and you're aware, you can kind of pick out those other people who are that way as well. So we were hiking one day and we were talking about how much we hated the smell of diesels. A big truck had just gone by. And so at that point, we started working on building some custom new furniture for her penthouse in downtown Durango. And when I met with her in that room, when I stood in that room, I could feel this feeling that I had learned to associate with EMFs. It was all those years of holding that cell phone up to the left side of my face. And whenever I had an exposure, my skin would prickle and my face would get hot. And in her bedroom, that's exactly how I felt. So I asked her if I could bring my meter. And she said, sure. So when we tested it, we could not find a single place in that room that wasn't at the highest level on the meter, in the red zone, basically. So that prompted us to hire a building biologist from Boulder who came last October, and he did an analysis of her house and mine and the houses of a few other people in the community. I live in the Animas Valley, and currently my house has low levels of EMFs, which is amazing to me. That's such a relief, because even with that, I have lots of problems. So if I lived in a high EMF environment, I don't know, I'd be dead probably. Her place, however, was really alarmingly high. The expert found the levels in her bedroom to be 35,000. He told her they should be below 50. Actually, he told her that she should just move. She and her husband had lived there for 10 years, and he had died just a few months earlier from cancer. But she loves her home, and she decided she would mitigate and see what would happen. She got rid of the Wi-Fi. She had her computers hardwired. She got rid of her cordless phones, and she had her television hardwired with Netflix and all of that. But that's the small stuff. Here's the big stuff she did. She had 3 coats of EMF shielding paint put on her bedroom walls and her ceiling. She had her carpet pulled up, and we put down foil underneath it, and it was all grounded into the outlets in the wall. And anyway, we tested it, and her levels had dropped to 500. This was a huge improvement, but it was still 10 times too high. We're still working on it. Next thing, and soon, she's going to have the 2 doors into that room painted with a screening paint to see if the levels will go down further. But she's surrounded by neighbors with Wi-Fi, and there's nothing she can do about that. And as you can imagine, this has been a very expensive and time-consuming project. She feels better though, and I can tell you that when I walk into the room, I no longer get the prickle, so I know that there's been a big improvement. The other thing I want to mention is I'm an avid gardener. I've been gardening in La Plata County for over 40 years. And it wasn't long ago that I could go out into my yard and in the summer in my gardens, and there would be hundreds of bees. I had lots of native plants, and there would be bees everywhere. Last summer, I rarely saw more than 1 or 2 bees at any given time, and sometimes I couldn't find any bees whatsoever. I think you probably all know that bees are pretty important for our food source. As the bees go, so do we. And a rancher friend of mine who's, not that aware of a lot of these things told me that that there wouldn't even be any bees now if it weren't for human beekeepers. I don't know about that, but it's not only bees, other insect numbers are dramatically down. And that also means that we have birds starving to death by the millions because they don't have anything to eat. Experiments have been done with bees and beehives, and the results have been dramatically disastrous for the bees. That's already been spoken to. So I'm asking that good decisions be made about telecom code amendments that will allow me to live in the home I love. I'm trying to imagine someone putting up these antennas and making me leave my home. Where will I go? I already live in the county. I already live in a low EMF environment. Why should someone have the right to change that? I have 4 acres, and I just think this is really crazy. So it's difficult to find safe services. The idea of going to a hospital now is kind of terrifying for me because of all the Wi-Fi and all the stuff that they have. And as been mentioned in this, the effects of EMFs are cumulative. I may be able to do something today that if I have additional exposure will prohibit me from doing that in the future. And I no longer think about traveling by air or going to a movie or even a crowded place after 6 o'clock in particular, because by 6 p.m. I have everything turned off in my house. I know it frustrates people who try to call me because they can't get a hold of me, but that's just the way it is. Awareness of our needs is important now and in the future. We have a right to public access and safe places to live. And believe it or not, there are a lot of us out there. It's just that so many people don't know it. I have a really close friend who doesn't believe in it. She had brain cancer surgery 3 years ago. I took care, and it was cancer. I took care of her cat for the 3 weeks she was gone. And when I was in her house visiting him, I noticed that the router for their computer was opposite the headboard on their wall. I also noticed that they had cordless phones next to their bed. Their house is small. She had this giant TV that she watched. She was addicted to the news and every news platform. And I talked to her about it, but I can't even though she's very chemically sensitive, I cannot get her to believe that she could be sensitive to EMFs. So that's just a situation where a person just doesn't believe it because they can't see it. And obviously I have spent thousands and thousands of dollars going to doctors, trying to get help for my issues. I realized that the traditional medical doctors, Western medical, they have no knowledge. And I have had to resort to alternative doctors, which are they're wonderful, but it's been really frustrating because all medical doctors want to give you are drugs. Here's your drug for whatever it is, take more Tylenol or whatever. So you may not notice us because our disability keeps us in our homes, largely away from our computers. And so at this point, we aren't really causing a lot of commotion, but we suffer from brain fog and memory lapses and precarious health that has to be meticulously managed. Lobbying for our rights in a world that largely doesn't believe in this invisible toxin is profoundly complicated to those who already feel so awful. And anyway, I just want to say thank you for listening. I think this is a wonderful step, and I hope that you hear it.
Danah, thank you so much for
We
sharing your
absolutely have to
experience.
wrap up, Cece. I'm sorry, but we've gone way over, and we've got some other commitments.
Is there some way for us to get Dr. Schoechle's slides into this, at least for you to look at and maybe to talk to him later?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Vandover, if you have slides, you have my email address.
Dr. Schoechle is the last speaker. And again, we apologize for going over.
I understand, but we've got to wrap because I actually need this Zoom room for the meeting that I'm pushing. So we've got to wrap this up.
Okay.
I can give you a 1 minute pitch.
1 minute.
Okay. I'm here. You've heard a lot of bad news. Well, I'm here with the good news. The good news is that La Plata County is in an ideal position to come up with the best system that will take care of a lot of these issues. You own your own electric utility. It's the La Plata Electric Association. You owned by the owner users, and the LEPA is in the perfect position to install optical fiber into everybody. Optical fiber is the answer, and there is absolutely no comparison between the level of service of optical fiber network and wireless services. So that ought to be your priority. That optical fiber is a public necessity. It's comparable to having water and sewer service and paved roads. It's part of the it's a basic public utility, and you ought to look at it that way. And you're in a perfect position to do it. I'll submit these slides. You can get the points, the high points from that about what I think is important to know about it. But I'd say go for it. Get that fiber installed, and it's going to help your energy system in every aspect of your life there. It's economic growth.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Schoechle. And Dr. Schoechle is one of the world's leading experts on telecommunications. He is the author of Reinventing Wires, The Future of Landlines and Networks, and that will be available to you as well. So thank you for staying with us. And again, any of us are available for questions as you digest this information. We realize it's like drinking water out of a fire hose when you first learn about it, but it's happening now, and it's happening very rapidly. So the sooner we can take action to protect our communities, the stronger we'll be. Matt, thank you so much for sticking with us. We're very grateful.
Thank you. I look forward to all that information, all the slides that you all presented. I will review that, like you just said. You just gave me a fire hose, so let me review all this, and then this will also staff will share that to the other commissioners too as well. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.